Hi, I'm Warwick Dias, and welcome to a new kind of thing. We are going to talk about movies that I've seen recently. And I'm going to start with this one, which is kind of a strange one to start with. Um, Europa Report. Um, I watched it on Netflix recently, and I have to say it was pretty good. Um, the one thing that's a little jarring is that it's kind of a found footage movie, in quotes. And the timing of the movie, like the sequence of orders that things take place, is not really that great. Um, Mostly because you're kind of jarred as in which way people are going, and it's interesting and it's a good sci-fi movie. Like it really, if you like sci-fi movies, I suggest watching it. It's worth a watch. It's one of those sci-fi movies that is really good. Um, it has pretty animation. It's well thought out. There's a very few things that I really had like major irks with. Um, Overall, for a sci-fi movie, this is probably one of the best that's come out in quite a while. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I think it's definitely worth a watch. The ending is well worth everything else and getting through the boring parts of the movie, because there's a lot of kind of boring parts of the movie and parts of the movie that aren't really contextually, I don't know, they seem out of place in general, but overall pretty good. And I mean, at least it's based off of something that we'd want to try to do today. So it's not like far-reaching sci-fi. It's not like in the year 2300 we've discovered. It's much more subdued, which I like. Um, but yeah, I mean, I really don't have anything that bad to say about it. The crew was pretty good. Um, the only thing that's kind of jarring about it is the space communication, and like the delay in between feeds is kind of weird, but they kind of tackle the issue, but later the issue is not quite so tackled. It's a confusing mess, which I'll talk about in the second half. Um, since I really just don't have much else to say about it, and enjoy the poster. I watched Apollo 18 recently. Um, as for a sci-fi movie, it's pretty weak. Um, Again, with the found footage stuff, not that great. Um, and it's kind of frustrating because when you do found footage movies, you have to be very careful that you don't pick people that are famous or identifiable. Um, so, as you can already see on the cover, if you don't recognize who that is, then, well, at least I think that's the same guy. Um, but that should be the same guy who's from Kingdom Hospital. He played the guy who, I actually, that's a spoiler. I can't say that. He's also in Sanctuary as Henry. You can just look that up on IMDb. But so yeah, Apollo 18. I'd have to say it's worth a watch just to get it over with, but I can see why this movie didn't do so well, and I can see why people who are sci-fi fans didn't really like it that much. Um, you know, when it comes to the moon, it's one of those things where it's like we have a pretty good understanding of things, and you know, it, this movie doesn't like it jumps the shark in terms of what it does. It it tries to push itself further and further and further out of normalcy until it's ridiculous. Um, but overall, I'd have to say it's like worth a watch, just not. It's don't expect miracles. Let's just say that. I originally wanted to see this movie because it looked interesting, but I never got around to it. It appeared on Netflix. I think it's still on Netflix right now, so you can look it up. I mean, if you're bored and you just want to watch something, it's well worth a watch. And actually, at some points, it's almost laughable, which makes it kind of okay. Um, but I don't know. It's riddled with inconsistencies and problems that are just kind of annoying. Um, but since I don't have much more to say positive about it or non-spoilery about it, let's move on. And now I'm going to do the spoilery part of it. Okay, so the bad part about this. Found footage movies. Like, if you're going to do them, you have to do them very correct. And having people in it that are recognizable is terrible. It just ruins all illusion. Um, Second off, I knew it was going to be a monster movie on the moon, which is so contrived that it's almost terrible. And to make matters worse, the monster on it is like a rock monster. I mean, seriously, a rock monster. Um, it was really kind of hard to swallow. And then, like, finding the Russian ship, and there happens to be this, and, there happens to be air on it, and, like, all of that, like, was just ridiculous. And it was so silly that you could have made the same movie about people trapped in the desert, and it probably would have been more interesting. And it feels like they just threw the sci-fi stuff in there just to throw it in. And, like, to make things ridiculous, is if such a thing were found, some sort of sentient rock monster, why would they go to the moon except to get them? And if they could get them, you think they would be prepared and they would let the astronauts know ahead of time, as opposed to just being like, well, screw you, good luck, sucker. And that's what it felt like. It felt like you guys get out there and sacrifice your lives for no apparent reason, even though we're aware of the things that happened. And, like, I don't know, it didn't have any charisma to what they were doing, and it didn't feel like there was a progression or a growth of characters or story or anything. It's like, well, I'm screwed on the moon and there's rock monsters. And I don't know, it couldn't hold me enough to be actually interesting. Like, I wanted to find out what happened, but it was just a sour note. And, like, I don't know, there's a lot of weird, like, moonwalking parts and stuff like that are just really inaccurate and really just not, like, it feels like they just fluffed those out because they needed something more to, like, drive it along. Like, it didn't feel like they were really pushing for a story or an outcome at the end. And whenever you have found footage movies, you can always pretty much assume that everybody is going to die because the footage is found. Like, that's just ridiculous. And, they talk about secret rocket flights and all this nonsense, but, like, we have a pretty good understanding of the rockets that have flown into space. I mean, it's not like you can miss that happening. Like, there are people who are literally rocket, like, fan people who go and watch and record flights and mark off, like, what this is. And even if the government doesn't say, there are still people who are obsessed enough about it that it makes it that people would know regardless. And if something that major happened, like finding life, they would ignore the fact that they're astronauts and say that there's life on the moon. I mean, that would be such a breakthrough that it wouldn't really be a well-kept secret. And, like, to say, like, oh, we took rocks from the moon and brought them back, which we did bring back quite a lot of rocks from the moon, that you would say, okay, well, are any of these the living rocks? And if they are, wouldn't we understand them better? And I don't know. It was incoherently done. and it was done in such a way that felt really contrived and strange. Um, I don't know. Overall, it just fell flat. It could have been something more, but they just it was a lack of trying is what it really felt like. And if you're gonna do a sci-fi movie and do all this found footage stuff, like people don't just run up to cameras and do like this guy's doing, like, oh my god, I'm in so much pain, quick, put my face towards the camera. And that's really how it felt. Like they really forced it. There's no like far-fetched scenes where people are barely on there and you can barely hear them and stuff. And the quality of recording equipment that would be taken would not be that great to capture it like they did, because the quality of the movie goes up and down and like all over the place, and there's no real record. Like, how would they find the footage if it was at a Russian lander site and like all this other there's just inconsistencies that just never got explained away, and it just became stupid. Like, oh, so all the people died there, so we sent other people there to go find out why they died, and that was all done in secret, and all they found were some tapes. Like, they didn't find any rock monsters that seemed like hostile. It's such a leap that it's not, I don't know, not that great. But if you're into sci-fi, it's worth a watch. You're better off watching the other movie that I'm doing, Europa Report, or just about any really other sci-fi movie. But I'll continue with more movie reviews. Probably tomorrow I'm going to do a whole bunch. But just to get some movies out there, some movies that I like, don't like, whatever. This Europa Report, I'd have to say I choose Europa Report as like a priority to see. It's a good movie. This, not so much. I mean, even as a horror movie, it's not scary. It's kind of cheesy. Like, moving rocks, really? Like, you just attach some string to a rock and that's it? Ugh, lame. Well, I'll see you in the next movie review. Alright, now I'm gonna do spoilers. Because, you should probably watch after you've seen the movie. So just fair warning ahead of time. My only problem with Europa Report really is the stupidity of the crew. When the first person, dies in space, that's understandable. That's kind of a situation you can't do much about. Not having anyone, like everyone's in the lander, no one's actually on the ship, like orbiting the planet, is ridiculous. They would never do that. They would always leave like someone there to at least do it. So if something really catastrophic happened, at least one person could go home. The other thing is, like, they're like, oh, they get killed by the monster, and then someone's like, look, there's glowing, I'm gonna walk towards it, even though that totally killed the last thing, and they keep falling into the same, like, tropes. Like, if I was on that planet, and radiation was getting higher, and there was some blue thing moving at me, I'd be gone. I'd peace out, goodbye, because that would make sense. And the other thing is that there's always this kind of procedural way about it that movies do. Or that, if you're doing space reconnaissance, you would say, this is our tracked time for surface exploration. This is our tracked time to get samples at this location. This is our tracked time for this. Like, everything has to be regimented and ordered, and that's the way spaceflight usually works. But in this, they just disregard all of that, and they're like, I feel like going out there and exploring. So for me, it doesn't feel... It feels like if a bunch of people who really didn't know the dangers were just doing this stuff and not thinking about it. But, I mean, the ending with the weird squid monster or octopus monster kind of made up for it. I like that it wasn't, like, discovered and it wasn't this huge thing. It was just more to get the proof. It wasn't like, let's discover this creature, we already have an entomology, we have all these things. It was just like, I just want people to know it exists. So that being said, the jarring in the beginning, I did like that they kept putting the pilot in, but it was just the pilot's like last speech. I thought that was really clever and well done. Um, and overall, like the planet and the way it felt and all the things made a lot of sense, and it worked well together. But at the same light, you know, the things like the gas pump freezing over or the fuel pump freezing over, like if you're going to the far reaches of space and you're going to an ice planet, like thermal shielding would be the first thing you would start putting on it to make sure and ensure that your lander was safe and secure and that you could get, especially a manned mission. I mean, you'd have to take so many extra precautions just to make sure. And like the radiation thing was kind of gimmicky. Like space is full of radiation, and it really depends on what kind of radiation you're really getting. Because if it was gamma radiation, you're probably dead. If it was like electromagnetic, that's probably pretty common with a gas giant so close to you. But you think that, you know, you would have someone who would want to see what this radiation was and a way to clarify it so that way you're not getting, you know, radiation poisoning, because you're not making it home if you're dying of radiation poisoning. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. But overall, worth a view. I always have issues with space movies, and this one has significantly less than other movies, especially the other movie I'm going to review alongside this.